What's up, people? Welcome to episode 73 of the CERES podcast. If you listen to episode 72, you'll know that we recently went from 80 articles to nearly 350 after lockdown. It's really great to get emails weekly from listeners, readers, customers, and friends suggesting what content we work on, so I'll extend this offer to everyone. Email me anytime on stelios@worldofceres.com to suggest any content ideas you may have or anything you might need help with and want us to break down. Some of the most read articles this month have been our switch from RBS to make some money. Everyone, well, not everyone, but some people thought that this was a scam. But in short, Royal Bank of Scotland have gotten a bit too big and the government have forced them to move customers away to other banks. One of the ways that they're doing this, and probably the only way they're doing this, is by paying you to leave. They pay you to go to another bank. I've heard reports from people I know that they've gotten anywhere from £5,000 to £45,000, and this is just from people I know. They take into consideration how much you bank with them, what loans you've got, etc., etc. So I'd say, if you're with RBS, it would be crazy not to consider. You don't have to, but consider it. Another popular article was, is it time to switch things up a little bit? In this article, we'll look at the efficiency of a business and how to drive more efficiency, how to speed up practices in your business. And we cannot ignore the impact of the article we wrote on pans pitting. After release, I had quite a few emails and messages online to say that those people had no idea that their pans had pitted. They genuinely thought it was just carbon. So they've been on the phone to their range manufacturers. Definitely read that article. It's really super helpful. If you have a few minutes and want to read some articles or buy some stuff, then you should pop over to worldofceres.com. There you can also buy our new super absorbent cloths. They are now back in stock after running out last week. It's pretty lucky cool. Those that already use the cloths really love how they absorb the moisture from the food all in one shift because they're really absorbent, hence the name. The most popular use case at the moment is putting them at the bottom of fish trays, so you can have a physical barrier between the fish and the tray, which traps the water in the cloth and underneath the tray. Also, many pat off their fish as they go along, and some mix it up and do both. The benefits are pretty cool, as you'll get better coverage, less blow off on your fish. If you do use rice flour as a pre-dust, you'll get a much drier, even coverage, which will reduce having a layer of uncooked starch between the batter and fish. To learn more about the super absorbent cloths, visit worldofceres.com/shop. In this episode, I talked to Amir Gehl. He's the founder and director of the super niche coffee supplier, Difference Coffee. Amir quite literally buys some of the most expensive coffee beans in the world and serves some of the best restaurants in the UK and abroad. He came to my attention on one of Andy Hayler's restaurant reviews, and I wanted to get him on ever since. I'm really grateful to Amir for making this happen on such short notice. If you have a Nespresso machine, had a bit of a lisp there, and want to treat yourself to some Hawaiian Kona, Blue Mountain coffee, or even fancy getting an Esmeralda Geisha Panettone for Christmas, then why not visit differencecoffee.com. I hate saying this because it always sounds weird. But I would absolutely love it if you can retweet and share our episodes. It really helps bring in new listeners. Well, on the flip side, only share it if you like it. And if you don't, well, let me know if I'm crap at this. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, then why not take a moment to leave us a rating? I just want to say that if you think I talk too much in these introductions, let me know. Or just skip ahead. I have been told I can talk too much, but I think it's a lie. On that note, onto the episode with Amir Gehl. Welcome to the CERES podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for your time. And I know I haven't given you a lot of time actually to prepare for this. You know, we sort of touched base at the end of last week and sort of planned it all, got it all in the calendar yesterday. So I hope I haven't disturbed too much of your diary.
No, not at all. Always a pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Oh, wow. what do I do? Whatever it takes. Well, my background actually is marketing. That's what
Yep.
I've been doing all of my life. I come from a family that have been involved in manufacturing of tobacco for many generations, 5-6 generations now. And I was involved with a family business for a while prior to setting up Difference Coffee. And funnily enough, not so much in the tobacco side of things, actually looking at leveraging our distribution of other food and beverages. So I got quite into looking at other products and so on and so forth. And the coffee thing sort of happened by mistake, to be honest. Funnily enough, I wasn't even a coffee drinker until about, I would say 5-6 years ago, but it's probably a little bit longer now because, what happened was I grew up in the UK. I moved to England when I was 11. And so I was drinking tea. And every time I was given coffee, it always tasted rather bitter and burnt like. So I understood that possibly I just didn't like that drink and I stuck with tea. And then one day, we were about to move house, myself and my wife, and my wife said, "Why don't we buy an espresso machine so that we could?" My wife does like coffee. I remember saying, "What for? I don't drink coffee," and she said, "It's not for you, it's for me." So I don't argue with my wife. Not over £100. So we bought this little Nespresso machine, and I was quite determined to explore coffee because it was one of those ingredients that really baffled me. You see, my biggest hobby and pleasure comes from food and drinks and sensory pleasures, let's say. I love red wine. I love, even smoking a good cigar and going to restaurants and cooking, and specialty ingredients have always been something that I was looking at. So, I always wanted to find out what's the best meat or the best fish or the best so on and so forth. So when we got an espresso machine, I thought, okay, here's an opportunity for me perhaps to try all the different range of capsules available to see whether there's a coffee out there which tastes better. And that's what I did. I started drinking it, but I drank it with sugar because it was way too bitter for my palate. And over time, I got sort of accustomed to it. Started going to restaurants and ordering coffee, and funnily enough, I'd say that 99% of the time, the coffee in my capsule at home tasted better than what I was given in a restaurant, which was quite was quite a shock to me, because you would think that a restaurant would be serving from beans, freshly ground, properly prepared, big machines. But at the end of the day, the acid test is what you're sitting and drinking and enjoying or not at the end of the meal. One day I remember I woke up and I saw on Amazon, or it was somewhere else, that you could buy those empty capsules and fill them up yourself. And it dawned on me that it's an opportunity for me to go and buy some rare stuff like Jamaica Blue Mountain or Kona, or the infamous Kopi Luwak, the cat poop coffee. And I always wanted to try them, but if you think about it, if you were to go to restaurants and hotels and stuff, none of them would be serving other varietals. The choice of coffee was actually limited to the choice of preparation, with that so much milk, latte, cappuccino and stuff, rather than the actual coffee, taste itself, varietal itself. So that's what I did. I went and I bought some Kona coffee because it was the only thing I wanted. It was expensive enough. It was about £250 a kilo. So it was expensive enough to try without going crazy, because I think Kopi Luwak was about £2,000 a kilo. And for my little experiment, it just seemed a bit too much. But I thought, okay, we'll start with Kona and we'll see. Kona is an area in Hawaii, so they produce amazing stuff. And I bought some from Harrods. I bought some capsules. Funnily enough, they had empty capsules at Harrods. And I came home, I filled it up myself, put it in a machine, press a button, and out came a drink which was substantially better than anything I've tried so far. It sort of makes sense. You purchase a better ingredient and you will brew a tastier cup of coffee, regardless of brewing methods. And that sparked the idea of creating a small company that would specialize in rare varietals or really, really high quality coffees. And that's kind of like was the beginning of what Difference Coffee is all about, or why it came about, I suppose.
So from the beginning, was the goal always to go to sort of high-end restaurants? Or did it just sort of think, well, they're the only people that can afford this nice coffee, so that it just fell in naturally?
To be honest with you, it wasn't. Initially, when I started, it was more of, okay, I'm a discerning customer and I have an espresso machine at home, and I don't mind paying more for a better tasting capsule, if it has a Kona or a Jamaica Blue Mountain. And, seeing that so many people in the UK and worldwide have capsules as well, I was sure that there is a massive market for it for private clients only. And I kind of thought, well, why don't I try that as a little experiment, as a little project, and see where it takes me. At worst, I'll have some capsules to drink for myself, and at best, we'll be able to make a small business out of it. And I wasn't really thinking so much about restaurants, but what happened was, the first batch that I've created, I didn't have any clients, and I had a lot of coffee. And I remember going to Harry's Bar in London, and I spoke to Luciano, who is the GM, and I told him about what I was doing, and he asked to try it, and we organized a quick tasting afterwards, and he fell in love with it, and we got listed, and that was our first client. And then I kind of thought, well, it's an opportunity. Really, it's an opportunity for restaurants as well to expand their selection, to offer customers something tastier than the average stuff that they might be serving. So I expanded to restaurant because I saw that. I think that, again, clients like myself that go to nice restaurants and enjoy a nice meal would prefer to spend a few more pounds at the end of the meal and get something that tastes better. I mean, what's the point of spending, a few £100 with a good bottle of wine at the Michelin restaurants only to be served a cup of coffee at the end that might have cost 10p to produce? It's doesn't make any sense and would ruin the entire, it would be the last thing that leaves the customer, that's left in the customer's mouth when he leaves the restaurant. So
we mentioned this before in our conversation, didn't we? We were saying how, like, you could go out and spend that sort of money and the coffee just ruins everything. It finishes sort of, it's the last thing you remember when you walk out of the restaurant. And coffee or tea. And if it wasn't a nice product that sort of finishes the evening, you probably get in your taxi or the tube or wherever and think, that was horrible or not nice. And it does probably cast a dark shadow on the evening.
It absolutely does. The thing is that until the past few years, a lot of, that was the only option. So a lot of people going to restaurants, they would expect the coffee not to taste good. I mean, if you go to a hotel, most hotels, and most restaurants, I should say, you would expect the coffee not to be as good as at a specialty coffee shop, let's say. There are many reasons for that, but ultimately, this attitude is changing. And I think that, what we've managed to do is we've managed to give the luxury hospitality the tools to be able to produce amazing tasting coffees in their restaurants regardless of volume. So whether they want to brew from capsules, or certainly if they have a lot of volume, from beans, because ultimately we have the beans. So it's actually, funnily enough, a lot of people think that we're a capsule company, but we're a coffee company. We just make most of the coffees available in capsules because they are the better way of producing them or brewing the coffee when you're having low volumes, I suppose. When you don't have a
Yeah.
barista and you don't want to make massive losses on dialing in the grinder multiple times a day, etc., etc.
So does your work involve traveling a lot to farms, estates, or do you mostly do it from the UK?
So, funnily enough, I do it all from the comfort of my own living room. It's a really, really bizarre situation. I'll explain why. What I do is very unique in that I specialize in extremely high quality microlots, most of which have been sourced from coffee competitions and auctions held at origin. So in the coffee world, what happens is that you've got amazing countries, amazing terroirs like Ethiopia and Panama and Guatemala and so on. And within those, the sector or the niche of specialty coffee, you've got annual competitions for the best coffee in the country. What happens is that every year during the harvest, many farms will compete, and any coffee that scores a certain number of points, in order to be regarded as a specialty grade coffee, you have to score 80 points out of 100. According to the SCA scoring sheet, it's something akin to Robert Parker's wine, grading, only for Arabica beans.
Yeah.
And in those competitions, coffees that score 80, let's say 86 or 87 plus, are considered winners. And the winners are then taken to auction. The auction is held online, and it's open to specialty roasters from all over the world. And what I've decided to do is I decided to bid on the highest scoring lot. So lot number one, which is always the highest point scoring coffee, and therefore the tastiest coffee or the best coffee. It's also, by its nature, it's also one of the rarest coffees because we're talking about micro lots of a few hundred kilos only. So,
Yeah.
and so all of the work, all of the identifying of that particular lot and everything has been done for me by professional independent judges. So, the downside of it is that it is extremely expensive. It is the most expensive coffees on earth because you end up buying, paying super premium prices for those really, really niche stuff because of the competitions and auctions. That said, you also have pretty much a guarantee that these are the best coffees that exist. It's competition auctions, and it's organized sometimes by the Specialty Coffee Association of that particular country. So, for example, in Panama, that's how it's done, or in other origins, for example, Ethiopia, it's done by the Alliance for Coffee Excellence with their Cup of Excellence program. So it's very much controlled, very regulated, and so on. So you have full transparency to nanolot level.
So it's never been a problem for you then, not being able to just jump over there and have a look then. And I suppose you couldn't do it feasibly, could you, at that level?
I think that ultimately, like I said, my particular niche is very extreme. It is the best coffees on earth. I think that if I was to try to find something which is amazingly good but cheaper, it would entail me having to travel to origin, go farm to farm, taste coffee, great coffees, and try to find something unique which nobody else has, identify it, bring it, and sell it, sell it with at a lower price, and at the end of the day, bring better value than what I do. Our coffees are not great value from a technical point of view. I could be buying coffee significantly cheaper and still really, really good, but we've decided to focus on the absolute best. It's just kind of like there are a lot of other specialty roasters out there who do what I just described, and they do a really good job. I think that we were talking about Mercanta. I mean, that's what they do. That's why it's called the coffee hunter. I'm not the coffee hunter. I'm just the highest bidder. So I do something very, very different.
Yeah, whereas they're probably looking at a whole range of coffees for different customers, whereas you're just looking at one, and actually it's what's defined as the best. and probably in that case the most expensive as well, whilst because they go hand in hand.
They also look primarily at selling to coffee shops. So when you're looking at coffee shops, you're quite limited by the amount that you can charge for a cup of coffee. We recently sold a cup of excellence coffee in London of the Ethiopian cup of excellence, and it ended up having to be sold per cup for 50 quid per cup.
Yeah.
Now it's sold out, and it's very rare and very small, but it just goes to show the length of the price that needs to be, that it will end up being in hospitality.
But you find that people at £50, is that more of a gimmick? Are people buying it because it's gimmicky, or are they buying it because they enjoy it? Is it because they've got the consumer, not the coffee shop? The consumer has that much money that £50 to them is like £3 anyway.
I think it fits it precisely and identically to how wine is considered. Most people will drink supermarket wines, but a very small minority of people, 1%, will drink, Grand Cru wines.
Fine wines, yeah.
But because only 1% of all the production is actually of that level, and only 1% of that will be the absolute top growth, the Petrus and all this kind of stuff. So our coffee is kind of the Petrus, the DRC, the Lafitte. It is very, very small, very exceptional farms. And, yes, it is absolutely more expensive in the same way that a glass of Petrus might cost you 1,000 quid in a restaurant. Now,
yeah,
it's, are there people that will enjoy it and will appreciate it? Yes, there are people that enjoy extremely tasty things if they know how to appreciate things, right? And if they appreciate and if they like coffee. So you have a small subset of the population that enjoys it, and myself being included. I mean, I love drinking amazing wine if I can afford it. I mean, now it's come to a point in recent years that a glass of extremely expensive wine is beyond, recognition of, price is just insane. So, but yeah, I mean, I can afford a £50 cup of coffee and enjoy it tremendously more than I would enjoy a £20 or £50 glass of red wine, because it's flavorsome.
So just thinking out loud, so if normal coffee beans are about $1.1 normally, and then fair trade a 1.5, give or take, where would an 80 score coffee be? What is it that you're sort of looking at per pound for the most part? Where is the difference? Where does it lie?
So when you're looking at when you're looking at specialty grade coffee, I would say it starts maybe around 3-4 per pound. I mean, that's what roasters would be would be looking at buying it for, and then it goes upwards. Anything to the most expensive coffee we've ever bought was actually paid for it yesterday, was $1,300 per pound. That's kind of like the range. And so if you're looking at the lower end, the amount is negligible. Yes, it's a few times more expensive, but actually when you look at it per cup, you're only talking about pennies, 10, maybe 10, 20 pence more per cup, and you're getting something which is of specialty grade, compared to what you were talking about is the price of commodity Arabica. So kind of like the majority of Arabica bought in the world.
Yeah. You buy your coffee, you win the auction, and then it sort of comes over to the UK for roasting?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Yeah. And then do you sort of have a signature way of roasting it, or is it always the same way, or do you then adapt it to the coffee that you've bought?
Each coffee will be different in its size and shape and composition in terms of how dense it is and the amount of moisture that it has inside. People don't know, but coffee actually has, 10, 11, 12% moisture. So based on those kind of attributes, you and this, like I said, the size and varietal, you will roast the coffee slightly differently, and also based on application. So, for example, if you roast coffee for filter brewing, you can take it down a notch and bring out sensory attributes which are more floral and fruity. Whereas when you're roasting for, say, espresso, you need to take it up a notch, slightly darker, in order to accentuate other, to bring out more body and bring a little bit more sweetness and so on. So it's really down to kind of identifying which coffees would work best for different brewing methods, be it capsules or espresso style extractions or filter type extractions, and then modifying the roast based on the brewing as well as the beans themselves. And you do that by kind of like, yes, there are certain protocols of what you should be doing, but there's also a bit of a trial and error, because different people will roast the coffee differently. And what we try to do a difference is we try to maximize the sweetness of the drink. So coffee has kind of like three attributes. You've got your acidity, you've got your sweetness, and you've got bitterness. And different coffees would lend themselves, like I said, differently, but we think that the taste, the sweeter the coffee, the tastier it'll be. So we roast for sweetness, and we find that people really like it. Yeah, I mean, we find that people really enjoy our roast style compared to other specialty roasters out there. Some of them roast quite light, and it almost becomes, when you have people talking about coffee and they like it really, really dark and stuff because they want to show off that they can handle the bitterness because it's like machismo or something. So in the coffee industry, in the specialty world, you've got people going the other direction. How light can you go? How much acidity can you tolerate? And I think, the truth is that people enjoy what's in the middle, sweetness.
Yeah.
That's what we go for.
Do you think that's because of I don't know if it's a recent thing, but do you think it's got something to do with, and I know it's at a completely opposite end of the market, but do you think it's something to do with like Starbucks, where they've now brought out like a blonde coffee, which is what they call their very light roast? And, do you think that's maybe where people's minds are leaning towards the lighter coffee?
To be honest with you, I don't, I want to say that I don't really know. And the reason I don't know is because I don't follow other roasters and what they do. And also, I don't look at the entire market. I'm very focused on a very, very small niche. So, yes, when I see suddenly Starbucks doing a blonde, maybe they've learned that because of the specialty industry, people are starting to talk about lighter roast, and they wanted to create a lighter roast as an option for people to consider buying something which might taste better. Also, it might mean that the beans are better. I don't know. I've not tasted their coffee, so I wouldn't know.
I
stopped drinking Starbucks long time ago, to be honest with you, primarily because I always used to drink their Frappuccino, which I think is really delicious. I don't think that there's any coffee inside it, but
I was about to say it's all sugar, isn't it?
The sugar and the ice and everything. It's really delicious, but it's not coffee. It's just something else. And I'm overweight as it is, so I decided that I'll stick.
No, I think you're right. It's probably definitely sugar, milk, and maybe some sort of coffee syrup. But yeah, it's not a proper. But it's tasty, like you say. It's very tasty.
No, absolutely.
And I think that's the point, that they don't always just do a coffee drink. They do coffee flavored drinks as well. And I think that's
funnily enough, not a lot of people know that, but the Frappuccino is actually not an invention of Starbucks. It's an invention of a gentleman called George Howell in the States, who is still a specialty coffee roaster, and he came up with that drink, and then he sold it to Starbucks and so on. So quite genius, but it's just something else. It's not coffee. It's a funny drink. Tasty drink, but
I think one thing I've sort of grown to like, and I do it all the time now, is cold brew. I do quite enjoy it. I grind my coffee, put it in the fridge overnight for 24 hours in cold water, sort of filter it the next day. And I really do enjoy that. It's a nice, long, slow drink. It does taste slightly different because you didn't extract with heat. And I quite like it. Coffee beans at that point are really important. because if you've not got good coffee beans, you're going to taste it. I think, yeah. There's
No,
nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide when it's just water and a cold brew, is there? So
I think that a lot of people, there was this fad I remember about 4 or 5 years ago for cold brew, and I think that the specialty community really loved it, possibly still do, because you really cannot. I mean, you can't get great tasting coffee at any temperature, but as coffee cools down, you get to taste more of its bitterness. So if you were to try to do a cold brew with commodity coffee, it would taste really diabolically bad. You need to
yeah,
put tremendous amount of sugar to balance the bitterness. But when you do it with a good quality specialty Arabica bean, then you can actually taste some really good, good flavors. So
I,
yeah,
I,
absolutely, you're right.
the problem I have is that I bought a load of coffee from Monmouth coffee
Okay,
beans,
great.
but I always throw away the little red label or the green label. I always throw it away. I never keep it. And I don't. I just sort of think I've already chose it. I don't need to know what it is now. Like I can move on. Like
Uh-huh,
you know.
uh-huh.
So I just ground about I think maybe about 200 grams of coffee, and I just filled up a big jug, and it's in the fridge right now. And
Uh-huh.
I think there's something about it. It's got like a nice long smooth flavor. I think that's what.
I think it's one of those drinks. Cold brew is a drink which is relatively easy to prepare. If you compare it, let's say a V60, a cone-shaped
Yeah,
drip, you need to kind of like weigh everything out. You need to have a timer. You need to kind of like agitate the beans,
yeah,
and you need to kind of work on your flow. And if you change any one of those variables, it will end up tasting really different in the cup.
yeah,
Whereas something like cold brew, or even a French press, they're significantly more forgiving.
yeah.
So it's much easier to brew or harder to screw up, and therefore I think that it's more approachable for people to make at home.
Yeah, I've got the V60 and I've got an AeroPress and I've got the French press,
Hmm.
numerous French presses. I don't know. I probably now, I just use them all. I like the AeroPress. I don't know. There's something about it. It's almost foolproof. And you, like you said, you don't only do the capsules, but it's a big part of your business. What
Yeah.
made you choose the capsules? And do you think it's the biggest, sort of fastest growing sector in the coffee sort of industry at the moment?
I chose capsules primarily because, like I said in the beginning, I sort of looked at myself and thought, well, people like myself have an espresso machine at home. We don't have traditional espresso machines. As much as I like coffee, I don't want to go and spend thousands on getting a proper machine and a grinder, and having to learn how to become a barista and all that fluff for one cup of coffee in the morning before I leave to the office, right? It just seems like a lot of hard work, extremely wasteful. So I started difference creating it for people like myself. Now, when it comes to restaurants, when I started going to hospitality, so a lot of restaurants don't have the volume to employ a barista or to keep the beans fresh enough, because beans deteriorate in taste really, really quickly after roasting. So they degas and oxidize. So really, you got to finish them pretty quick. And what capsule does is that it stops the deterioration of taste of each portion by basically stopping each portion from degassing and oxidizing. Those are the two ways in which you lose flavor. So, because of my niche of extremely expensive coffees, which are slowly rotated because of their price, and because our customers like to have a variety, they like to try to offer different things for their clients, have a coffee menu of 5 6 different coffees. You cannot achieve that with the beans unless you're running a really big coffee shop with
Yeah.
lots of traffic coming in. It's just not viable. I suppose the brewing method chose itself based on based on the coffee, and rather than anything else, if it makes
Yeah.
sense.
So when it goes into the coffee pod, not looking for any secrets here, is it just does it last longer because the lack of surface area and it's sealed, or is it just, or do you have to do any other special processes as well?
Well, basically, if you ever take a coffee capsule and you pierce the aluminum foil, all that you have inside is basically ground coffee. Now, what happens is that when you pack capsules, it's a very, very simple process. You've got a grinder grinding the coffee into the chute, which goes and dispenses it into the container, into the capsule itself. It will then go and dispense nitrogen in order to remove any residual oxygen, and then it
Yeah.
will close it. So it's a bit
Okay.
like in every single. It's a bit like yogurt pots if you think about
Yeah.
it. You have a pot, you've got the yogurt coming in, nitro flushing, closing it in, and then it can keep for
It's
quite a
what
long
it's,
time.
it's what they call modified atmosphere packaging, isn't it? Essentially. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that you can check if a coffee is or anything really is that it needs to be written on the bag that it's been packed in a modified atmosphere,
Yeah.
packaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
what
it's,
it is.
it's interesting because I suppose, and then that gives you, like you say, like how much time would that then give you, rather than just having beans or grounds on a shelf like usual? How much
So,
what's your
oh,
perishable life?
so this is the thing. By having you roast the coffee, you let it degas for a certain amount of time. We like to degas for around 3 weeks or so. And the reason is because you want the coffee to stabilize. And I mean, most coffee shops, they will not serve coffee immediately fresh because there's too much residual oxygen, and the coffee will, you will not extract the taste to its peak. And then when it's at peak condition, you you grind it into the capsule, you nitrogen flush it, and you stop. So by doing that, you keep it at its peak condition, and you stop the deterioration in taste. Now, shelf life of capsules, it's really interesting because, when you ask the manufacturer of the capsules itself, how long does the material can it keep? And they would say something along 2 years.
Okay. Wow.
Now we write 1 year because that's kind of like industry standards for coffee in modified um, atmosphere. But to be honest with you, we sell our coffee quickly, and nobody is going to keep any of our coffee for a year. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
So,
You'd hope not. You'd hope not. Well, actually,
well,
with COVID and restaurants closing for a little bit, you never know.
well, funnily enough, yes, it's true. I mean, that was the beauty. Any of our clients that bought capsules from us and had to, reopen 6 months later, actually didn't lose their stock. So that's pretty good.
I don't know if you heard the podcast with Stephen from Macanta, but one of the things we discussed was Kopilawak. And actually the fact that, the animal welfare, how do you sort of avoid some of the issues surrounding that product?
You need to understand what Kopi Luwak is in order to avoid the, let's call it, the fake. So Kopi Luwak is an interesting coffee. It's not a coffee so much, it's a process. So it's the way by which the coffee has been fermenting, picked, and kind of, yeah, I mean, I suppose picked and the initial fermentation. So the story goes, from what I understand, is that in the old days, you used to have coffee farms, and you used to have, you know, a team of pickers, and they would pick the coffee, and they would the coffee cherries, I should say, and they would give it to the estate, and the estate would pay them per kilo. So it still happens today, by the way. So most coffee is bought that way. Specialty coffee, by the way, isn't. Most of specialty coffee is bought per, the prices that they pay farmers is per hour, but it's a whole other subject. So back to the Kopi Luwak. So what happened was that in some farms in some countries, for example, in Indonesia, in Sumatra, there is an animal called Kopi Luwak. It's a wild cat. It's a nocturnal animal, and it would come to the coffee farms during the nighttime, and it would eat some of the ripest berries, and I should say coffee cherries rather. And in the morning, during the harvest, the pickers would go, and as they would be picking the cherries, they would find droppings of the luwak on the ground. And those droppings were collected by them, they were washed, and they were roasted. And what they found was that it actually produced extremely delicious coffees. So they kept it a secret, and then afterwards the estate owners discovered that the coffees that they were drinking themselves was tastier than the stuff that they were delivering to them. And I think that what happened was twofold. Number one, the coffees were picked by the cat in its natural surroundings. So the cat would have the ability to be discerning in the sense that he would only be eating the ripest cherries. He won't eat anything, green, for example. So, if you look at the coffee plant, it produces cherries and they start off being green, and then afterwards they would ripen up, become red most of the time. Then afterwards they would become over ripened and they might fall, etc. So when you're a coffee farmer trying to maximize your yield, you'll kind of like put everything in a basket and sell it. But with the cat, you would only be eating the ripest. So that was kind of like initially the first way in which coffee was selected. The second issue has to do with fermentation. And what they found is that the enzymes in the luwak stomach benefited the acidity of the coffee, which is really important in the coffee world. So it ended up with a coffee that was pretty good and with a unique taste. So that's kind of like where it came from. Now, like anything in life, when everything tastes really, really special and it comes in small production and it's by nature and so on, it commands a premium. And that's where Kopi Luwak commanded really, really expensive premiums. Fast forwards to 2020, and much like in any type of animal farming, you've got animal farming for Kopi Luwak. So what happens is that the animal is caged. He doesn't choose the cherries. He's completely stressed and his biome is affected, so the fermentation is affected. And it completely defeats everything that Kopi Luwak was all about. So yes, it might have come from the cats having eaten it, but it's not going to taste good. So that's kind of like the issue of Kopi Luwak. Now, when you understand it from that perspective, you can start asking the right questions. And the right questions is, number one, is the coffee source from wild? Very simple question. And the second question is, even if it is from wild, is it tasty? Does it still qualify for being graded as a specialty grade Arabica? Because there's no point in a coffee scoring 60 just because it came out of a cat. It still needs to be delicious. So when we source some Kopi Luwak, very small amounts of it, because we cannot find big amounts of it anyways, but we're extremely discerning. That those are our two criteria. It needs to be wild, it needs to be specialty grade, because then what it means is that it tastes good and it's the real thing, the way that nature has intended it to be. You basically guarantee that it tastes good and there's no cruelty involved. And there's no animal intervention. There's no contact between the farmer and the animals, because they don't meet each other. I mean, it's one, the animal eats at night and does his thing, and the pickers come in the morning and they do what they do.
So the problem probably lies where people want volume of Kopi Luwak, because then they're caged and so on, and then it's probably not even getting, like you say, if it's not getting the benefit because it's just eating it and pooing it.
Well, if you look at any industry which is done, when you got industrial farming, it's the same thing. I mean, look at compared wild salmon, the taste of wild salmon and farm salmon. It's a completely different taste, sensory experience. Yeah. Same thing with Kopi Luwak, which is real, versus Kopi Luwak, which is farmed. So farmed is kind of self-defeats the entire purpose of what Luwak is meant to be.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And if we jump over to sort of human rights issues and child labour issues for a second, fair trade coffee, we would discuss with you at great length the other day on the phone about fair trade and how you were saying, like many people I've spoken to in the coffee industry, that they just don't, they don't fully agree with the fair trade coffee label, let's say, certification. Give our listeners an example of why it's a problem.
So fair trade is a really interesting accreditation, and it's an accreditation that is given to, I suppose, was created to try to help farmers across um, various industries, coffee, cocoa, and others. And the reason it was created was because of the problem that farmers are being paid very little, and most of these crops are sold as commodities. And as with any commodities, you have fluctuating prices when it comes to commodities. And many times it happens that the market price at any given time is lower than the cost of production. So it means one of two things. Either the farmer needs to completely shut his farm and move and farm something else. So, for example, if you look at Colombia, a lot of coffee farms had to shut down and they're now growing cocaine because there's more money in it. And even if they wanted to do something which is respected like coffee, they just can't earn a living. So, um, that's basically the main issue. So fair trade came to try to resolve it, and it came and tried to resolve it by offering a premium over the commodity price in order to stop farmers from getting having to close down or making big losses. Now the thing is that at the end of the day, the acid test is whether farmers are even with the premium making a decent living. And unfortunately, what we found, and it's not a secret. I mean, fair trade say it themselves. You can look at you can Google search fair trade, and I think that there is an article. It's called if you Google fair trade and coffee crisis, and there's an article talking about you having to pay more if you want to get rid of the coffee crisis. And the coffee crisis talks about basically the price issue. They themselves admit that in many cases, even with their own premiums, it doesn't actually guarantee a good solid income to farmers. Now they're trying their best, and I mean, they have moved, they have made a significant difference to people. However, when you're talking about whether it's enough, I don't think it's enough. And my concern, speaking to the trade and also to customers, is that they're led to believe that fair trade means the farmer makes a good living, the roaster makes a good living, the coffee makes a good living, and unfortunately, when people buy a fair trade product, believing that they're buying something which brings good income to farmers and it doesn't, I think that they're misled. Now, it's not that they're misled intentionally, because you can understand, there's only good things that fair trade does. It's just that it's not, the name doesn't reflect the reality of the commercial reality of things. So, what they do
Where
sometimes ends up
where
being
where would you
good and
say
sometimes ends up being just enough.
where would you say that the price needs to be for fair trade coffee? If we said earlier, like we said earlier, $1.1 for normal, $1.5 for fair trade, give or take, $3 to $4 for specialty and upwards. Where do you think it should be, like, to make it fair for everyone?
Well, I mean, if you think that the cost of production can, it all depends on the quality. And if you're looking at cost of production, they can fluctuate, let's say between $1 and $1.50, let's say. So definitely you want to cover the cost of production and make some sort of profit, because otherwise it's not sustainable. I mean, they're also farming to make some sort of profit. So if I had to kind of look at it and kind of like throw out of thin air, maybe $2. I think that's, and you're talking about pennies.
Yeah.
Pennies. So it's, and that's the real shame, because you go to a restaurant and you get charged £5 for a cup of coffee, which, if it was bought for an extra few cents more, it would actually result not only in a tastier cup of coffee, but one that brings really, really good income to the farmers. So that needs to be addressed further, I think.
One thing that's became sort of apparent to me, that if you buy coffee for the most part from, let's say Costa Coffee or Starbucks, for argument's sake, consumer coffees, the consumer pays more VAT than what they do on the coffee.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and if you think so, that means in some ways, the government of the UK probably make more than the farmer who actually picks it and grows it. And that's not just the UK government, by the way. I mean, like any government who's taxing a coffee.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about, let's say, a Starbucks cup of coffee, with milk and stuff, would cost maybe, I don't know, £3, let's say.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah, as an average.
If of course, if you're sitting in and drinking it, so it's 20%, right? So yeah, it's 60
Well,
cents.
if it's hot, there's 20% on it leaving anyway. So
yeah, so definitely they'll be making more than the farmers.
And that's such a crazy place where they've not, and it's not the government's fault. I'm not blaming it on them, but I'm just it just shows the paradox that an organization who didn't even touch the product is making more than the person who actually went out and farmed it and watered it, and their kids stayed off school to produce it, and so on.
No, absolutely. And the issue is that ultimately, even with fair trade coffee, at the end of the day, it's a certification. It's the body that does its best in order to try to alleviate the problems of farmers. But ultimately, if they're not going to earn like really decent income and guaranteed really decent income, the families that, I mean, most coffee farms are, they are owned by small families, and comes harvest season, and the entire family will pull its weight and they'll go and pick cherries. So, there's no, you're not talking about slave labor or anything like that. It's just, on the weekends and so on, you come to the children, you go, hey, we're all going together as a family, we're picking cherries, we'll make a lot of money together, and the children are happy doing that. But ultimately, children should be going to school, children should be playing with children. They should not have to help their families make enough to buy food when we are consuming it in a way that, so it's just not fair. And the beauty of specialty coffee is it allows the farmers to escape that commodity cycleness of prices, and it enables them to charge proper premiums. And those proper premiums mean that the farms can then, have proper profits, and they send their children to school. I mean, if you look at some of the farms that we work with, for example, in Panama, we work with a farm called the Hacienda La Esmeralda, one of the most respected coffee farms on earth. They produce the infamous geisha bean. They have their own schools within the estate, where during harvest season, all the children of the pickers will be schooled and be receiving hot meals, etc. So so that the children don't have to do anything else. And that's seriously important. And the only way they could ever do something like that is because roasters like ourselves pay them more, and customers like the guys going to the Michelin restaurants ordering them pay as well more. So it's a cycle. It's a really nice cycle that the more you pay, the better it is, and the more everybody wins.
Yeah.
And I think it's like that with a lot of ingredients, anyways.
So, as a buyer of coffee, whose responsibility is it to source better coffee? Is it mine as a consumer? Is it yours as a roaster, as a supplier? Is it everyone's? Is it the government? Should they, put standards there? Whose responsibility would you say it is?
Well, this comes down to ethics at the end of the day, doesn't it? And I'm a firm believer that you know there is the old chicken and egg, what comes first, but essentially if you're the business owner and you're the one creating something and selling it to people, I think that, and I think people would agree with me, that we as roasters or anybody else in any manufacturing or any business has a responsibility to create something which is sustainable, something which doesn't exploit other people, something that protects children, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, in my business, I take full responsibility of everything that I do. And you got in touch with me last week. You mentioned your podcast, and any opportunity I can mention these things. And what I'm talking about is not trying to promote what I do. Of course, I'll be happy if I get customers out of this little chat, but ultimately, my vision is that in every fine dining establishment, in every 5-star hotel, in every household that has an espresso machine, people brew coffee which is of specialty grade, which not only tastes great but also rewards the people who've grown it, and gives them a good, decent income. So it's a big vision. I'm obviously not going to do it all myself, and most of the roasters around me, other specialty roasters, will do the lion's share. But I think that perhaps me going to extreme and putting a flashlight on quality, perhaps that will help illuminate and make it better for our industry and make it better for specialty growers and specialty roasters in general. And that's kind of like something that I really want to push forward in our talk today, really.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned the other day in our conversation was that Pret a Manger are doing a subscription. And I did some research here, and I ran the numbers. So it's £20 a month coffee subscription. Take away VAT, that's £16.67. You can have up to 5 coffees a day. And this is the maximum calculation. You can have up to 5 coffees a day. So that's 150 coffees a month. Let's just assume that someone is really, having a laugh. Yeah. That works out at 11 pence a drink. Now, that's
including VAT.
Say again, sorry. No, that's take away VAT, because I took the VAT off the £20.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay.
So I always do that just because it's the industry I'm in. We always take VAT off. But so 60, because obviously the £20 isn't Pret a Manger's. It's only 16.67. So what does that do for the industry to some degree? And now I know that's an extreme use case. No one, I don't think, would drink 5 coffees a day unless that's their office. Because, some people do just sit in a Pret a Manger with their computer all day, which is fine. So how does that, because, if they're saying their coffee's organic, fair trade, and so on, and then they're doing that pricing model, how does that feed back to the industry?
Well, here it's about perception, and this is something that I have a professional problem with it, and I'll explain why. Like I said, my mission is to try to get people to understand that much like any other crop, coffee has different grades and qualities, and those qualities are reflected in the price of the coffee. Any attempts, therefore, to devalue coffee, or any attempts which are done by marketeers which end up devaluing coffee to only be worth pennies, keeps driving the message to consumers that coffee is a commodity which is really, really cheap and should be treated in that way. And basically, it makes it harder to premiumize the drink. And ultimately, the only way to get better, to get people to pay fair trade and so on and so forth, is to be able to charge more for coffee. So it's a real shame that coffee is used by companies as a loss leader in order to promote the rest of their industry, because they're using something which is already devalued to begin with. So that's kind of like something which, I think it's a shame that it's being used. It would be much better if they offered it on a sandwich, for example, or a meal deal, that sort of thing. Or
yeah, no, I get that. I just, when I did the numbers, I just thought it just didn't make sense. But again, that is the extreme calculation, and I guess they would have just factored in that someone's having one or two a week. I guess I don't know anybody at Pret a Manger, but I guess that's what their calculations are.
at the end of the day, it's a question of what, at the end of a promotion like that, what does the typical consumer think? He thinks, well, coffee is something that has so much margin in it that they can afford to do it with coffee. And therefore, coffee should never cost more than X number of pence. The only reason it costs a lot is because there's massive profits in it. By sending out that message, it becomes harder for people to promote a higher grade of coffee.
Does it take us back to the old days when, let's say 25 years ago, where coffee was 25p and tea was 25p from the local cafe in the UK? Like, in a way, like, remember years ago before the coffee shops opened, it was unheard of to spend £3 on a coffee. And I wonder if it sort of takes us back there. And I just looked at my notes, and it actually says that the first month is free as well. So, sorry about that. I just saw it at the end of my notes. It actually says first month free.
How fast can you cancel afterwards? That's the question.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be like your gym membership, isn't it? I guess,
for a year, right?
So, one of the things we spoke about, and one of my pet hates is, I think I told you not so long ago, me and my brother-in-laws all went out for a nice meal, great food, and the coffee at the end was disgusting, and it had a real bitter flavour. And I sort of said to you that my friend told me that that's because the machine wasn't cleaned properly. But what's one of the biggest issues with poor coffee in hotels and restaurants? Is it the quality of the bean? Is it the machine? Is it the staff skills? What would you say it is?
Well, I think it's a combination of everything, really. A lot of people think that coffee is just one of those ingredients that you can just stick into a portafilter, press a button, and out comes the drink. And the skills of the barista aren't really necessary. But actually, to create a good cup of coffee, you need to be very mindful of the preparation. I mean, the machine needs to be working properly. It needs to be clean. If the machine is not clean, and if the group handle isn't clean, you're gonna have rancid taste of coffees from the extraction before. And if the coffee has been left in the grinder, or even worse so, pre-ground, and all of its taste evaporated, in the first 15 minutes post grinding, and it's kind of like left there overnight, it's just going to taste horrible. So there's loads of reasons why coffee ends up tasting extremely poor. The thing is that the more you educate people about what makes a good cup of coffee, the more you move into the realm of more expensive machines and more expensive beans. So there's almost a bit of like incentive not to teach people the truth about good quality coffees, especially in the top end of the market. Funnily enough, I go to restaurants and I meet chefs and stuff, and those are guys that care a lot about ingredients that have been pitched by every single coffee company on earth. but they're always the big ones, and they always say things like, "We picked the best 2% or 1% of the best coffees on earth." And you go like, "Oh, that's really interesting. But by which standards do you operate when you say 1%? Is it the SCA standards for Arabica grading?" No, no, it's our own internal standards. Oh,
Okay.
okay, fine, fair enough. Right, okay, I get it. And that's what it's all about. So there's a lot of people. I mean, you go on to any brand and they all write, we source the finest beans in the world. They all say the same thing. That's why, I find it extremely difficult, because I can actually prove that my coffee is the best in the world, but you need to explain why. So we can't just, I can't just go and make an advert. I can try, but I don't know if it will work. If I just say we pick the best coffees on earth, I mean, everybody says that, so it becomes meaningless. There's no governing body, I suppose, in coffee. That's because if you think about it, 99% of the coffee is poor. So it's really, really hard to promote that when you've got such strong powers in the commodity space.
So would you recommend that people don't get machine rentals then?
Well, that's another thing. Another thing when it comes to restaurants is a lot of restaurants, the beverage choice beverage is given to the restaurant manager, and a lot of time the restaurant manager, he will meet suppliers and they will come and they will offer free equipment and free grinders and so on. And we both know, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Mm.
There's no such thing in life as a free meal. It's if you're going to get equipment for free, the equipment is not going to be good.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And the higher level you go in terms of like the smaller the restaurant and the less volume there is, the less it makes sense to give good equipment. So you end up in a position where restaurants have really, really bad equipment that they think that they're good. They have really bad coffee that they think it's good. Some of them kind of know it's not good, but they're not exactly sure what to do because they've been so conditioned to be giving stuff away for free. Then suddenly the having to spend 15 grand on a kit, on a proper grinder and La Marzocco coffee machine, etc. It's a big investment. So it's funny enough, we get a lot of younger chefs now who are very much more open to specialty coffee. But like I said, also being able to offer our coffees in capsules have managed that, because suddenly you don't have to invest in big machinery, and yet
Yeah.
you can produce a cup of coffee that tastes better than anything that you can from a traditional machine using commercial grade coffee.
Yeah.
So that's my contribution to our industry, to
So
hospitality.
so what 2 or 3 things or pointers would you give, whether it's a home buyer of coffee or a business buyer of coffee, to start upgrading that coffee experience?
Well, I think that when it comes to, well, both trade and private clients, the first thing is, buy the best quality beans that you can, which I think it's basically specialty grade Arabica. So Arabica, like I said before, it's graded using that system. It's an acknowledged system by the Specialty Coffee Association that created it in the specialty community. So if it doesn't say specialty on the bag, if it doesn't say specialty on the box, it's not specialty. So you'll get a lot of premium coffee, luxury coffee, fine coffee. Those are all marketing terms. Whereas specialty coffee is reserved to specialty grades. So I say that's the first thing. Just make sure that you buy the absolute best, because you cannot extract a flavor if it's not there to begin with. We've got a saying that says, if it didn't happen in the farm, it's not going to happen in your cup. So you got to start off with a quality bean to begin with. The second thing is you have to buy as little as possible to maintain freshness. See, coffee, like I said before, it degasses and it oxidizes. That's how it loses flavor. So it's better to buy fresh and often rather than to buy a lot at one time and to hoard it. Now, here is where capsules have an advantage, because you can actually buy enough for a long time and it's not going to really degrade in taste. So that's why capsules are a really good solution. But that's a second kind of pointer, because people like to brew using filter. So again, it's better to buy once a week a little bit than to buy once every 2 months a lot. So that's the part. And the third thing is I suppose the equipment is important, but it's important more for volume. So I'll give you an example. I mean, at the end of the day, with good beans, correctly brewed, I can pretty much brew using any quality commercial machine, let's say, or any good quality home brewing unit. So obviously, just like anything else, the more expensive, the better. But people concentrate a lot of times on the equipment, and then they forget the beans entirely. So it should be the other way around. First think the quality of the beans, the freshness of the beans, and then think about the equipment that you're going to be using. And when it comes to home users, think about what equipment you can use that is going to be used daily without you having to, because you can spend 10 grand, 15 grand on traditional machines and stuff, but for one cup of coffee, what's the point? I don't make espressos at home. There's no point. I use capsules, and I can produce espressos at home if I wanted to, but it's just too cumbersome.
Yeah.
When it comes to restaurants, is again, first of all, quality, freshness, but third, you're not going to get good machines and great machines by getting them free. It just doesn't work. So if you want to produce a good level of quality of coffee at your restaurant, you should treat it just like any other apparatus that you use in your kitchen.
Yeah.
And that's it. You don't be swayed by false promises of people that tell you that they're selling you the best and are giving you everything for free, because it doesn't work this way in life. So why would it work this way in coffee?
And one more question before we go. You mentioned Arabica. Can you ever get a good Robusta?
Yeah, I mean, so Arabica and Robusta are two of the commercially traded cultivars of beans available. And traditionally, what you have is, and they're roughly grown at 40% Robusta, 60% Arabica, or thereabouts. Robusta grows in low altitudes and produces coffee that doesn't have the complexity of Arabica in general. That's why when it comes to specialty coffee, you're only ever talking of Arabica. There's no such thing as specialty Robusta. In fact, there is a quality of Robusta which is considered better, and that is called fine Robusta. So you do have better quality of Robusta. So, for example, if you came to me and say, Amir, would you prefer a fine Robusta to a commodity Arabica? I will, because it's probably going to taste better.
Yeah.
But you're talking about things which are not that flavorsome to begin with. So yes, you can definitely get Robusta better than Arabica, yes, but you're operating on the low level of taste in general, in my opinion.
When you're at home and you're chilling out, what's your go-to coffee bean?
My favorite bean is the Geisha varietal. It is a varietal which was discovered in 2004 in Panama, and it tastes, there's coffee and there's Geisha. It's a completely different experience. It tastes sort of like a combination between coffee and tea. So funnily enough, if any country was to embrace Geisha, it would be England. So really, honestly, I mean, literally. So that's my favorite bean, and I will brew it from a filter in the morning, because filter has more caffeine than espresso. Most people don't recognize it, but I'll have it as a filter in the morning, and I'll have it in capsules later on during the day as I'm working and I don't have the time to prepare filter. It is also our most expensive coffee, but there is a correlation between uniqueness of taste and quality. So I'm very lucky because I'm in the industry and I buy it. I can afford to drink it on a daily basis, on an hourly basis if I wanted to, because it's much less expensive for me.
Yeah.
And it's also extremely difficult for me to drink other coffees because none of them taste as good as a geisha.
Yeah.
I mean, I do drink other coffees, don't get me wrong.
It's funny because you say that. A friend of mine yesterday was talking about whiskey, and he said he was on a Macallan, one that he really liked, and then went back to another one that he just had to finish off, and he said he didn't find it very nice at all. And I thought, I wonder if it's the same thing, that your palate just gets accustomed to the finer thing, and then you like it, you get used to it.
It does. Unfortunately, it does. If you think about it, you grow up and you discover more and more the taste of things. And when you're young, you're satisfied with McDonald's. And it's like the most amazing thing on earth. Their chips and their nuggets and stuff, and ketchup, and that's it. As you grow older, you become more accustomed. I mean, if you can afford to, of course, you become more and more accustomed to more flavorsome things because you discover them. And at the end of the day, the joy that we had drinking, having a McDonald's French fries when we were 10 years old and having a geisha now that we are 40 years old is the same, essentially. It's just that it's a lot more expensive. So I always laugh, when I first tried wine not for the first time, but when I got into wine, my experience of wine tasting was also very similar to coffee. I got interested in it. And there was a wine place called Vinopolis or something like that. And I went to that place. It was like a kind of like a museum exhibition kind of place for coffee, for wine. And you go in, you buy some vouchers, and you go room to room, and you taste different things. And I remember that I discovered that my favorite wine is red wine, and my favorite varietal is Cabernet, and my favorite bottle from the whole lot was their cheapest plunk. I think it was Blossom Hill for $5. And looking back, I'm thinking, why did I ever try anything other than that? I could have been happy with drinking a £5 bottle of wine, and that would have been it.
Yeah,
it would save me a lot of money.
Yeah, it's true. But once your brain knows, that's it. Yeah.
Knowledge is power, but knowledge is also expensive. So.
Well, I think we can trick ourselves mentally to buy the things we want. Oh, but it's better. Oh, because this. Oh, because of that. And really, we all probably fall prey to the marketing as well, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how discerning you are. Some people are and some people aren't, and
exactly,
different people, different. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Amir, I just want to say thank you for your time. It's been great. And I took up plenty of it, and I'll share the link to your website on our introduction. And you can go make a coffee now. You probably need one.
I will, absolutely. I do need one, actually. Thanks for having me, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Amir.